5:30 in the morning, the phone rang, and my wife in the bed next to me said, "Which child has had an accident?" And I listened, and a Swedish accented voice said, "How does it feel to win the Nobel Prize?" And I wasn't sure that it wasn't a hoax, but I said to my wife, "It's okay, no child involved." And then the announcement came that I had been named. It seemed genuine and not a hoax, and I was surprised. And I think one of my reactions was, and my second daughter criticized me later when I told her about it. I said, "Well, it's nice to have a lot of hard work rewarded." She said that was a very stuck-up answer.
Well, it was clear from the citation that perhaps invariant with every other laureate that despite the tradition of the prize being for a specific contribution, the committee could clearly not avoid saying, "You've made specific contributions, each of which would be more than the Nobel Prize quality to almost every field." And then, of course, your textbook, and they made it clear. And I think everyone would agree that you are perhaps the last truly general economist in making enormous contributions to every field. And then if we think of our special field, mine that you contributed in
You're talking about finance now.
Finance now, yeah. That you may recall in a festschrift 20 years ago, I took note that all of your most significant finance papers had been produced after the age of 50, and that therefore negating the purported iron rule that scientific productivity declines with age beyond a certain point. I've since noted that you've added 26 more publications since that time just in finance. So I think you're continuing to provide additional data along those lines. But turning to
Are you saying that when I once said in finance I'm only a Sunday painter, that isn't quite true?
Yes, that's exactly right. Or we all wish we could be such Sunday painters. Yeah. I have my favorites of your papers and your contributions, but I want to ask you, can you tell us what your favorite contributions were? The ones, any number, but just what are the ones that you're really thinking about, or the ones that you...
Well, almost every one of those papers was directed toward a prior formulated problem. For example, about the time you came on the scene, when I wrote about what the time profile of risk taking should be, depending upon whether you were going to retire and die 1 year from now, or retire and need income 30 years from now. I wrote the paper to work out what was rational, because without argument, everybody assumed that as you got older, you should be more conservative in your equity tolerance. Now, they seem to believe, because all of the economists had had a smattering of classical statistics, that with large numbers comes greater security, lower variability. And so if you have 35 years to retire, you're going to have samples of 30 quasi-independent items, and therefore risk erodes as the horizon number ahead grows. Well, there's an obvious exception to that. By that time, we all knew about constant relative risk aversion, where when you use that utility model for your postulated Laplacian rational investor, you do the same thing when you have 1 year to go if you're facing truly white noise, and as you would do if you had 100,000 years to go. That it's not the statistical law of large numbers that's involved that makes some sense of the customary dogma, but it is the fact that you have the option of working harder or working less hard if your optimistic guess goes wrong. And so in that model, when you add the variability of your supply effort over your life cycle, there is some truth to it. Every one of the problems I wrote about was in the air. Your father would have understood that. The doubletons, tripletons. I've never been a believer in the single great man theory of either heroic generals, Napoleons, or heroic Einsteins and Newtons. We're all different, but the scientific quasi-self-correcting process is a group process. But if you ask, which is my favorite in that area, it's a paper that I wrote for the retirement session of Jim Tobin at Yale. Jim Tobin was a beloved friend and really my role model. I tried to be as righteous as he was and as judicious as he was. And so there I buried the usual assumption in finance that you have a random walk. By the way, I've never believed in the true random walk. When I proved that anticipated prices will fluctuate randomly, it was not that if you wait long enough, this P that I have in my hand will sell for as much as that Cadillac that you're driving. That's what happens with a really random walk. To go into the substantive result was, I took the simplest process I could imagine of what I call red noise. White noise is truly random walk, that the future is independent of the past. So knowing what the stock rose yesterday has no influence on the probability distribution of what it'll do percentage-wise between today and tomorrow. That's white noise. Red noise I called regression towards the mean, where there's a negative serial correlation through time, so that if things go up a lot yesterday to today, you should bet that they won't go up as much as they would normally do between today and tomorrow. That's red noise. Blue noise is the opposite still, where if things went up yesterday, they will go up in a probability sense more often tomorrow. The baseball announcer has it of course conveniently all wrong. Ted Williams is due to hit because he hasn't hit for 7 days. That's red noise. Ted Williams is hot. He's sure to hit tomorrow because he's hit for 7 days. That's blue noise. Well, the vulgar description of an efficient market with random movements, which is white noise, is in between.
I seem to recall that you did some investigation early on with put and call dealers.
Yes. In those days, the state of Illinois regarded options as illegitimate gambling. So the Wall Street Journal of Chicago had no option prices. The only option prices were in the New York edition, and the put and call dealers, which had little trade association, were mostly European refugees in dingy offices outside of the high rent areas there. So I would go there and ask my innocent questions. Typical question. Mr. Godkin, is it true that if I buy a put because I think a stock is going to go down, and I'm correct in my inference, and the stock does go down, and I make a profit on my put, that profit, which came from the drop in a stock, can be treated as a long-term capital gain if I've held that position for over 6 months or over 1 year? He said, absolutely. I said, well, you know, if I sell short, that's not true. He said, I know that, but this is different. And I said, are you sure? He said, absolutely. I said, are you telling me that if I wrote a letter to the IRS and asked for a private letter confirming that that's the case? He said, why would you want to do that? Okay, that's just one tale. But talking to still another one of those guys, he said, I don't understand. Why are you here? What are you up to? I said, I'm trying to study the science of option pricing. He said, that's hopeless. You'll never succeed. And I said, why not? He said, it takes a European kind of mind to understand this industry. So in revenge, I gave the name European option to the simpler option. But you know, the review that I wrote of Beat the Market by Thorpe and Kassouf is not in the collected papers. I don't know whether I should blame you.
Was that you need to blame me.
Is that volume 3? No, I blame myself. Maybe I thought it was too ephemeral. Actually, it's got a lot of verve. And in a certain sense, writing that paper may have kept me from discovering the Black-Scholes formula. The leitmotif of my review was, there is no such thing as a perfect hedge. And this purple prose of the book was, it's very easy to make money just on mergers and stuff, do this and that, and it's money for jam. Well, it's never money for jam. There's always an eventuality that has relevance where you can lose money.
It certainly doesn't escape anyone looking at your 1965 warrant paper that the Black-Scholes formula and your formula are exactly the same formula, except your alpha is equal to the beta equal to the interest rate.
Well, by the way, I published in recent years a paper with co-authors that clears up an open problem that I couldn't solve in the first paper I ever wrote. A problem isn't something that you have in the past. It's like a child or a perpetual care grave. You've got it with you all the time.
I guess you've mentioned again about the importance of understanding practice, but of course finance has had the great good fortune that finance science has really had a subsequently huge impact on practice. And
you know what helped in this?
What?
A market to be viable has to build up volume. Tax straddling started the currency market. If there hadn't been that, I think it would have been a much slower process of accumulating the necessary critical mass, because these are not constant returns to scale processes. The markets themselves, they're increasing returns processes. It was a shibboleth that no new market will ever fail. But when they tried to have a market where you insured against changes in macro variables, it fell on its face. You couldn't get two sides. It takes two to tango.
What do you think going forward? I mean, you've been...
Well, I'll tell you, I have questions. The whole existence of these elaborate derivatives is a marvelous opportunity to spread risks and share risks and so forth. In fact, it's also a marvelous temptation to take on risk. If 2-to-1 leverage is what you get by following the letter of the law on margin borrowing, getting a good financial engineer to help you, you can achieve leverages of not 2-to-1, but of 10-to-1, maybe a 50-to-1. And most people in the industry don't know really what their risks are. It certainly will take lots of difficult monitoring to be sure that we end up with a more stable situation rather than in times of crises and so forth, less stable. Also, I should say that in my own investing, which I never discuss with anybody and which is a very unimportant part of my life and involves very little application of energy and time by me, I have not been able to find a remarkable congruence between I make money where society benefits and I lose money on things where society is going to be hurt. On the contrary, if you take, well, let's say the new Warren Buffett or Warren Buffett Munger methodology, you buy a good company with a franchise. Apparently, anybody can recognize what's a good company with a franchise. When I sat at Schumpeter's knee at Harvard, I learned there are no franchises under capitalism. The top rooms in the capitalism's hotel are always filled, but they're filled with different people. This is a quasi-belief that there is such a thing as a permanent oligopoly, which has an edge to coin money if it just keeps its nose clean. Well, I don't think that is so. But to take a different case, it's good to get the incentives of the decision makers in a corporation in alignment with the interests of the corporate stockholders. Now, it could be that by a Darwinian freak, the new generation of CEOs are 10 times as smart, 10 times as conscientious, work 10 times as hard for the interests of the shareholders. But I beg to doubt that. My definition of a good trader is somebody who, over a long period of time, controls downside and comes up with upside. I suppose I have known a few hundred people, and I would say, with a little time out, I might come up with 10 names of people whom I consider to be pretty good traders. But there's no relationship between what their gains are and what their contribution to the increase in total factor productivity of the society they live in. They are people who are a little quicker than their others. And that quickness is where the money comes in. They also are a little bit shrewder. Now, there may be one or two people who have hidden methods, which by definition I will never know about, who coin money repeatedly. It's not a simple thing that laissez-faire necessarily creates for the good society the most optimal thing. I believe, I'm centrist, I'm an eclecticist. I believe that with reasonable regulation, not zero regulation, the performance of a mixed economy can beat that of any planned dictatorial utopia or of any laissez-faire. I grew up for first 15 years of my life, yeah, in essentially pure capitalistic, very few unions, and no onerous federal or state legislations. And there was a nightclub singer, Sophie Tucker. In her act, she would say, "I've been rich, I've been poor. Believe me, rich is better." Well, I was in the pre-Keynesian, mixed society, and in the mixed, believe me, the mixed society is better. However, and here I blame no politicians, I blame us, the electorate. The farther we get away from the Great Depression, the farther we get away from, quote, the good necessary war, World War II, which was run in a very efficient fashion by the U.S. government in comparison with, say, either the Russian or the German collectivist governments. Altruism seems to be eroding away, and there's much more of the libertarian me philosophy. It shows itself, of course, in saving, over-consuming patterns and so forth. So, but you can't dissolve the electorate and get a new electorate. The paradox to me is that I get, in my position of modest affluence, handout after handout in the new order that we're in. And the people who maybe work for me, a nurse who helps me if I need a nurse, gardener and so forth, they're the ones who vote for the people who are giving me the handout. Now, it's not as if we're getting a more efficient mixed capitalism. And the distinct possibility that estate taxation will be eroded away to zero, I think is not sociologically a good thing for the future society, but I've only got one nose and one vote. I subscribed to the Freed RHL service. He would give you a list of hot items. And one of my colleagues, Dick Eckes, would borrow this survey from me. And he said to me one day, "Why do you take that survey? It's almost always wrong." And I said, "Well, it costs me $150 a year, but if I get one good idea from it, that's very worthwhile." I thought about it for 24 hours, and when I saw him the next time, I said, "I want to amend what I said. When you get one good idea net," because it's those recommendations that I've had from optimistic brokers. "I've got a new IBM for you." By the way, in the old days, an IBM was considered something which couldn't go down and could only go up. Those new IBMs recommended to you, that's the way you really lose money.
What would you say today to the investor, to the household? I mean, the person in the street. I mean, because there's so much back and forth. What would you have any guideline prescriptions? Or?
Well, for most people, diversification, low turnover in your portfolio. You don't hit very many home runs that way, but you don't have lots of strikeouts. I've been at MIT for, 60 years. And in the course of that time, a number of colleagues have died and left a spouse usually a widow. And so perforce to my door have come a few widows over years asking my wise advice. It's not business I like to have, but they say, where can I get disinterested, accurate advice? And I'm actually almost at a loss ever to say. I could tell them what a simple, defensible strategy would be. S&P 500, have more index funds outside of the core of the S&P 500, have a European share, and so forth. But it's very hard to get advice, and I know that people who don't have the simple knowledge and beliefs that are quasi-optimal, they have to pay for it. If you haven't got a friend who will talk you out of your depression, you've got to pay a psychoanalyst and a pharmacist to do it. But it's in a lucky country like America, it's really hard for things economically to go seriously wrong.
If you'll permit me, it reminded me when I was here as your research assistant, and you're fond of a story you tell about, I guess it was Dickinson, the mathematician at Chicago.
Yeah.
And as I recall the story, and I know you'll correct me,
Yeah.
it was that he used to play bridge in the afternoon.
At the Quadrangles Club, the faculty club.
At the Quadrangles Club.
Yeah.
And a colleague said,
no, a student said, Professor Dixon, how can you waste your time playing bridge every afternoon at the Quadrangles Club? And he said, well, young man, if you thought as intensely and carefully between 8 and 12 as I do, you could play bridge.
So much the story of hard work, well-earned play.
And tennis.
Now, and tennis.
Yes.
And tennis is, of course, for you, but you see, you too have done that. And when I was here as your research assistant, we were working on a problem in warrant pricing, and you took off, as you often did, in the afternoon to go play tennis. And I thought that perfectly appropriate. I kept you working. But I may remind you that as I was struggling away on one of those partial differential equations, I got a phone call from you. And you had come off the court, I guess between sets, to say you had thought about it, and here's the way you think we ought to do solution. So I just thought about that sitting here, and I said, well, you too, like Dickinson, and much the same story for Hardy with cricket, you work very hard, you're well-earned play, except you do it with your own twist. It appears that when you're at play, you're at work.
Right. Now, did I not play with your brother-in-law?
Yes, you did.
I thought I
He tells that story to this day.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a good life. I've always been overpaid, underworked, because my work isn't work.